Hello, and welcome to Define American with Jose Antonio Vargas. I'm Jose. One of the biggest misperceptions surrounding undocumented people is that we don't pay taxes and that we are a drain on the United States economy, when in fact, the opposite is true. I say we, as you all know, I have a working visa now, but for decades, I paid into the system while I was undocumented, working my way up as a journalist. Undocumented people pay all kinds of taxes: sales tax, local taxes, federal income tax, property taxes, accounting for tens of billions of dollars each year. In fact, conservative estimates suggest that half of the roughly 11 million undocumented people in this country file federal tax returns each year. We even pay Social Security and unemployment tax, even though we are ineligible to receive those benefits. So rather than being a drain on the economy, as the media ecosystem that tells the lies about us have been telling Americans for years and years, we are paying into a system that we can't even reap the benefits of. Now, the Trump administration is using this against us. Recent reporting from the Washington Post revealed a new agreement between the IRS and the Trump administration where the tax agency would share information with immigration officials to confirm the names and addresses of people suspected of being in the country illegally. This is a massive breach of trust and confidentiality that the federal government has promised taxpayers. The laws that protect immigrants from having their tax data revealed are the same laws that protect U.S. citizens. Immigration advocates warn that this will have a massive chilling effect on immigrants paying taxes and filing tax returns, and will have a devastating effects not just on immigrants, but on the United States economy. With me now to talk about this new developments is Francine Lipman. She's the William S. Boyd Professor of Law at UNLV in Las Vegas, where she focuses on federal and state tax law and policy. And she has a ton of experience working with undocumented people, serving as a strong advocate for tax justice for immigrants. Francine, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Francine, as you know, for decades, immigration advocates, as well as the federal government, have been telling immigrants, both documented and undocumented, to pay income taxes and file tax returns. Our tax system has a ton of confidentiality and privacy built into it, and undocumented people who file tax returns have been assured that they will not be targeted for their immigration status. But now, the Trump administration has thrown all of this into disarray, turning immigrants' tax compliance against them. Can you talk about the history of this agreement, how undocumented people have been encouraged to be tax compliant, and what this new agreement between the IRS and the Trump administration means for these people?
Well, interestingly, this confidentiality statute, which is a federal statute, came into being after President Nixon used the IRS system against his political enemies. As a result of that, Congress implemented confidentiality and privacy laws of your tax information for everyone to ensure all taxpayers feel comfortable, feel confident when they file their federal income tax returns. That was in 1976. Well, the federal government has a don't ask, don't tell system for taxpayers. We want everyone with U.S. source income to pay their taxes. And as a result, for decades, undocumented immigrants have been filing tax returns. And frankly, I've been doing this for 20 years since the Bush administration was promising the potential of a path to citizenship. As a result, taxpayers and tax advocates across the country have been encouraging undocumented immigrants to file taxes, be compliant, because it shows good moral character. It's a way to assimilate to be American.
I think for me, one of the very early things I learned about being American is all about the tax system. And by the way, I did not know that the privacy laws that came out of the Nixon era. What's the parallel here? That was Nixon looking at his enemies, and now you have this administration, now that President Trump is back in power, right? The promise of these quote unquote illegal aliens as the enemy, right? And so now the weaponization of that, as you're talking, I was just thinking about it. Now, let me ask you, Francine, you are one of the people that I first thought about when the Washington Post story broke. What was your first thought when you read that Washington Post story about this potential new agreement between the IRS and ICE?
Well, Jose, as you're not going to be surprised, I wasn't surprised. We have been on the front lines worrying about this issue for months. As this new administration came into being, they told us again and again and again, in every way, mass deportation. We're going to do whatever we can to get these individuals out of our country. And so I was not surprised that they would use every possible piece of information that they could use, not only to hunt down compliant taxpayers, but perhaps more importantly, to scare people, to frighten people into self-deporting.
Well, I have to say, I've had several friends of mine who are journalists reach out to me about, wait, Jose, you've been talking about undocumented immigrants paying taxes. I mean, I've shown my tax forms to friends, right? Because many of them didn't believe it. When I used to go on Fox News a lot, I said it to Bill O'Reilly, I said it to Lou Dobbs, I said it, right? And they didn't understand, like, how can you as an undocumented person who's not supposed to be here, how are you paying taxes? And then I had to tell them, well, there's this thing called ITIN number. And they're like, what is that? Can you talk to us about your own journey about finding out the ins and outs of how, quote unquote, undocumented, quote unquote, the illegal aliens, right? Like how undocumented people have been paying taxes. How did you kind of stumble upon this fact?
The way I stumbled upon it was literally 20 years ago. I was working with college students in a business school, and it was tax season. And in fact, Jose, it was April 15th. And we were at a volunteer income tax assistance site helping over 200 people who had appointments that day to file their tax returns. The Internal Revenue Service invited me to join them to help. And in hindsight, I now know why they did, because my college students knew how to file tax returns manually. Let me remind you what that means. That means using a pencil and a piece of paper and a calculator to compute your taxes. And literally at 8 in the morning, a taxpayer comes in. English is his second language. He wants to file his tax return. And he has a stack of W-2s and this other number called an ITIN. I had no idea what was going on. What was this situation? I asked the IRS and they said, oh, this is his taxpayer identification. The reason why the IRS had us there was because those numbers would not work in the tax software. So all of these tax returns had to be done manually. So all day long, we worked hand in glove to get these taxpayers compliant. That night, I assure you, I went home and I started digging deep into trying to understand this system. And that summer, I'm an academic. I spent that summer writing what I would describe now as a seminal paper.
I was going to ask you about that. The title of this article is the taxation of undocumented immigrants separate, unequal, and without representation. So you start this paper with this quote. Many Americans believe that undocumented immigrants are exploiting the United States economy. The widespread belief is that illegal aliens cost more in government services than they contribute to the economy. This belief is demonstrably false. Can you tell us about this misperception, this lie, and what the data actually shows?
So the data is actually compelling. Unauthorized immigrants, they pay over $100 billion every single year into the federal, state, and local tax systems. And when we compare an undocumented immigrant's tax rates, their effective tax rate, it's higher than a similarly situated US citizen. Because in addition to paying into Social Security, Medicare, unemployment, and other state programs that they don't benefit from, they are not eligible for the second biggest anti-poverty program in our country called the Earned Income Tax Credit. They don't get that credit. They similarly did not get any of the recovery rebates. And in fact, that became very salient during the COVID crisis when the frontline essential workers were unauthorized immigrants who were working to feed us, but yet they didn't qualify for the enhanced federal unemployment or any of the recovery rebate credits.
And Francine, $100 billion you say is a conservative estimate?
It is. And let me tease out the reasons.
Yeah, yes, please.
It doesn't include the dreamers. As you know, dreamers receive a Social Security number.
Yeah.
Well, they are in, limbo. They are not included in the 100 billion. And dreamers disproportionately work at a higher rate than similarly situated US citizens. It also doesn't include individuals who are on temporary status here because they receive a Social Security number. In addition, like you, many of these individuals have been here their whole lives, except they weren't born here. And in fact, most undocumented immigrants have lived in the United States for 16 years or more. As a result, most of the households, most of the taxpayers I work with, they're mixed immigration status households. So the 100 billion only includes taxes from ITIN holders.
It's hard to think of another group of people in America that contribute this much to all of us, right? Like if there's a pie and here we are contributing something to that pie, and yet we can't take that slice of the pie.
Absolutely. This community is subsidizing Social Security and Medicare.
So back up a second. Undocumented workers, the quote unquote illegal aliens that they're scaring off to self-deport and leave this country, right, are subsidizing Social Security.
They are ensuring that my grandma, my parents get their Social Security and subsidize Medicare, which, as you know, is at risk of further cuts. What other group has been literally put into a slave labor type of situation where they don't have a voice to say, hey, we're taxed without representation? We are discriminated and treated horrifically at work. You could be a convicted criminal. You could have a felony record, be a rapist, and still qualify for Social Security and Medicare and get tax benefits that this population doesn't get.
A little personal story. When I got to the Washington Post right out of college, I have a social security number that says clearly not valid for work, right? So I just assumed, because, every day I'd wait in the mailroom to try to see, is anybody going to tell me that this is not valid for work? And then I remember when I left the Washington Post, they contacted me saying that I had money into Social Security. And I was like, wait, what? I didn't realize that I had been contributing to it. And then I'm thinking to myself, if I'm one person, how many other of us? I just assumed, and that's the thing when you internalize this feeling of you're not welcome here. And so therefore this is my slice of the pie. This is what I'm contributing, right? Is that the kind of justification you've heard from a lot of the students and a lot of the families you've dealt with all these years?
These families jump over, and college students, I'm working with a lot of college students now, they will jump over very high hurdles to be able to be tax compliant. To try to apply for an ITIN now is not only expensive, but it is incredibly onerous and time consuming. And most individuals, when they think about filing their taxes, at least US citizens, they're procrastinators, right? April 15th is the day that people start thinking about filing their taxes if you're a US citizen. Undocumented immigrants, they are anxious to cross the T's and dot the I's and be tax compliant because they know that to the extent there's a chance they might be able to get that golden prize of US citizenship, they want to have everything in order.
Let's back up a little bit here because I think going back to the ITIN, right? Because I bet you, how many people you think, in terms of awareness, are people aware that this program has existed since the 90s?
Pretty much every day now, I'm getting an email from the media saying, do undocumented immigrants pay taxes?
This is what I'm getting at. It's actually so now. Can you actually unpack for us what are the different kinds of taxes that undocumented workers pay?
What's, I think, perhaps most salient for individuals, arguably, is that into the state and local governments. And this is predominantly through sales tax. But the other taxes you pay to your state and local government, when you register your car, you pay a personal property tax on the car. If you are a homeowner, you pay property taxes on your home. If you are a tenant, the economists will say that you bear the burden of that property tax through your rental payment. So in state and local taxes on an annual basis, and again, this is, I believe, a conservative
Conservative.
number, about $37 billion a year. Into Social Security, which, as we all know, when you pay into Social Security, it is, as many seniors are reminding people today, it's an entitlement. Social Security is the biggest anti-poverty program that we have in the United States. If you qualify for Social Security, then not only do you get a monthly benefit for the rest of your life, but your spouse does as well. And so paying into the Social Security system without getting that retirement benefit is theft.
And you and I know a lot of people who have contributed on this for decades and decades and can't reap what they've sown.
Literally, I've worked with taxpayers who have paid into the system for over 35 years, and they're senior citizens now, of course, having to work because they don't have a retirement program. And even more tragically, they don't have health care. They don't qualify for Medicare, even though, again, they're paying in every single year.
So now talk to me then about what this agreement that the Washington Post broke. Could this mean? How would this IRS agreement with ICE, if they do decide to work together, do you think undocumented people who have been wanting to be tax compliant, do you think they're going to question why should they still be doing that?
Of course, it has a chilling effect. And we're seeing that already, not just in the undocumented immigrant population, but as I described, these are mixed immigration status households. So as I described, after the Nixon, debacle, Congress signed into law a federal statute that protects everyone's tax information. Needless to say, there are some exceptions to that rule, and the IRS and DHS are negotiating. And by the way, of course, there's litigation right now pending in the courts to try to stop this. So, in order to get this information, they need to have a court order that says that this information is critical to some non-tax crime. But it has had a chilling effect across the country. And the IRS and the US Treasury is expecting that by April 15th, the United States Federal Treasury will have a shortfall of $500 billion because taxpayers are just thinking they shouldn't have to be compliant because the IRS has been gutted. They don't have the resources to come after taxpayers. And tragically, the people who want to be compliant because they see it as a part of being American, wanting to be American, are being chilled.
I know you have office hours for undocumented students looking for tax advice. What have you been hearing from them?
They are, needless to say, worried. They're frightened. They want to be tax compliant. They want to do the right thing, but they don't feel as if they understand or even can know. They don't have the information to know what the right thing is. And as you've said, for decades, folks have been telling them, you follow the law. You don't go past the speed limit. You stop at every stop sign. So they want to be tax compliant. And Jose, one of the things that is so offensive to me is because of the way our tax system works, if you are a employee, you are likely over withheld for your federal income tax liability. The system's designed that way so that you're motivated and inspired to file a tax return to get your refund. And so these are students who are living, you know, student loan to student loan. And if they're giving up tax refunds because they're afraid to file, that is tragic. And it's not also not good for our economy. One of the things that happens during tax season, it stimulates the economy. People get their refunds, Jose, and what do? They spend them.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, what advice, this is a hard question, but I have to ask you, what advice would you give to undocumented people if they are trying to decide whether or not they should file their taxes this year?
At this moment in time, because there is so much going on, literally, it's like playing ping pong with 25 people on the other side of the table. I think one possible option is to extend the time to file. There is an automatic 6-month extension. It extends the time to file, but not to pay. So if you're owed a refund, that's fine to extend. If you need to pay, you can pay with the extension. But I think right now, at this moment in time, there are too many issues up in the air. And so a pause and an extension might be, in some cases, a good decision.
Well, as you're saying that, I'm thinking to myself, then what happens to this government if millions of undocumented workers decide that they can't trust this government to safeguard their privacy and their addresses? Then what happens?
Well, what will happen is the type of economy we had more than 20 years ago, and that is that many workers, and not only undocumented immigrants, were in the cash economy, right? Off the radar. I think what you would do is you're pushing people to go back to that where they're not paying into Social Security, they're not paying into Medicare, they're not paying into unemployment, they're not paying into disability programs. So that's not the direction that's healthy for anyone in America.
What is your message, Francine? Because you're right, like dealing with advocates, dealing with immigrants themselves, you are, as you said, in a bubble, right? What is your message to the people outside of the bubble who don't know, who just found out that undocumented immigrants, because people now are like, can I trust that information? Can I trust that information? Like they're just finding out, okay, it's reliable. Undocumented immigrants actually pay into taxes and Social Security. What is your message to that person, to those U.S. citizens who are just waking up to this fact?
I would say get the facts. So many people don't realize that the people taking care of their children, the people taking care of their parent in the senior citizen home, fixing their roof. There are 11 million undocumented immigrants across the country who, in many cases, are married to U.S. citizens. I've worked with people in the armed forces who have undocumented immigrant spouses. Undocumented immigrants are your neighbors, they're your friends, they're your caregivers, and they are contributing to our economy at a higher rate than you are. And in fact, the economists at ITEP have demonstrated if we just legalized, authorized work for this population, their tax contributions would go up about 40%. The biggest return on investment is in this community.
To the people watching and listening,
At the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy.
this is a nonpartisan organization with data. It's reliable. Please look it up if you're listening and watching. ITIP. A little story. One of the reasons why I ended up going on Fox News a lot was because I really wanted to get out of my bubble. And so one time I got invited by a Kiwanis club. I think it was in Nebraska or something. And I went and I brought my tax forms with me, right? I'll never forget, this gentleman got up and said, Mr. Vargas, that is not fair. You've been paying into the system? Because he didn't know, right? And then by the end of the conversation, he said, Mr. Vargas, you should sue the government. Taxation without representation. And I said to him, sir, I think I'm in enough trouble as it is. I'm not sure suing the government as this illegal alien is going to do me any good. Now, lastly, I'll say, listening to you, the information you've given us, I'm reminded of how important it is for people to think of themselves as you are the media, right? Apparently, Elon Musk, our unelected Elon Musk, has been saying that to his followers. So I'm saying it on this other side of it, and the side of information that is factual, information that is verifiable. You are the media. So when you hear your neighbor, your coworker, your relative, your friend say something about how these illegals are draining society, look at the numbers, pass information around, and make sure that you are as informed as possible. So, Francine, thank you for informing us. Thank you for the work that you've done and continue to do. I'm sure we will be talking to you some more as this develops. So thank you.
Thank you. Knowledge is power, right, Jose?
Absolutely, especially now.